Picture the most famous tyrant in English history. The bloated giant with the tiny eyes. The man who married 6 women and beheaded 2 of them. The king whose leg rotted so badly that courtiers could smell him coming from 3 rooms away. Now erase all of it. Erase the ulcer. Erase the rage. Erase the 54-inch waist. Put in its place a 17-year-old who stands 6'2" in an age when most men stop at 5'6". Give him gold-red hair, calves that ambassadors write home about, and the ability to wear you out at tennis, out-wrestle you, out-shoot you with a longbow, and then dance until 3 in the morning while you lean against a wall trying not to die. That's Henry VIII in 1509. Not the monster, the athlete, the most physically gifted king England ever crowned. A man the Venetian ambassador called the handsomest potentate he had ever set eyes on. And the ambassador had seen a lot of potentates. We're going back there tonight. Not to the divorces, not to the tower, not to any of the things you already know. We're going to the 10 years nobody talks about, when the future monster was the most beloved young man in Europe, and when serving him was the most dangerous, exhausting, glorious job a boy could have. One young man, his hands, his aching back, his terror, everything he would have seen, smelled, heard, and survived. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I still don't know whether you fall asleep to them, or whether you just lie there in the dark enjoying the fact that at least you never had to hand a lance to a king who might die holding it. Either way, subscribe if you feel like it. Get comfortable. Here we go. The lance in your hands is cracked, and the King of England is going to ride with it in less than an hour. You found the crack 30 seconds ago. A hairline running 4 inches along the grain, just below where the van plate seats, so fine you feel it with your thumbnail before you see it. And now you're standing in the armoury shed at the end of the Greenwich tiltyard, with your heart going like a smith's hammer. Because there are exactly 2 possibilities. Either you carry this lance out to the rack and say nothing, and maybe it holds, or maybe it shatters wrong on impact and drives a foot of splintered ash through the visor of an 18-year-old king who's been on the throne for 11 months and has no son, no brother, no heir but a pack of quarrelsome cousins. Or you go and tell Master Guillot the lance is flawed, and Master Guillot asks who dressed this lance, and the answer is you, and boys have been beaten bloody in this yard for less. There is no third possibility where nothing happens to you. That's the first thing you learned here. Something always happens to you. The only question is whether it's the strap or the gallows. Your name is Will Dunmore. You're 15 years old. You've been an apprentice in the King's Armoury at Greenwich for 1 year and 4 months, and your hands are shaking so hard the lance is knocking against the rack. You carry it to Master Guillot. He's bent over a gauntlet at the far bench, working oil into the finger lames with a rag black as tar, and he doesn't look up when you say his name, and he doesn't look up when you say it again, and only when you put the lance across the bench in front of him, crack upward, does he go still. He runs one scarred thumb along the floor. Once, twice. His thumbnail catches where yours caught. Who dressed this? I did, Master, last night. The crack wasn't. You stop. You don't actually know the crack wasn't there last night. You were tired. The light was bad. You want it to be true. Guillot looks at you for a long moment. He is a Fleming, 50-something, with a face like a walnut and forearms that could bend the lance across his knee, and in 1 year and 4 months you have never once seen him smile. You found it, he says. You brought it. Yes, Master. He picks the lance up, walks to the door and hurls it onto the scrap pile like it's firewood. Then he comes back, takes a fresh shaft from the rack and puts it in your arms. The new ash is cold and smooth and heavier than it has any right to be. 13 feet of it, and your shoulders scream because you've already carried 11 of these this morning. Boys who hide cracks kill kings, he says. Boys who find them keep their teeth. Dress this one properly and will. He's already turning back to the gauntlet. If the king dies in my yard, they will not stop at hanging me. Remember that every morning. That's the whole speech. That's as warm as Master Guillot gets. And this is how you learn the first rule of Greenwich. The most charming young king in Christendom is surrounded every hour of every day by people who are quietly terrified of getting him killed. Because here is the thing nobody outside the palace understands. Henry VIII, in the year 1510, is not a man who sits on cushions. He runs at the ring. He rides at the tilt. He wrestles. He throws the bar. He shoots at the butts. He hawks. He hunts until he has exhausted 8 horses in a single day, and the grooms are weeping over the 9th. He hurls himself at physical danger the way other kings hurl themselves at supper, and every piece of equipment he touches, every lance, every strap, every buckle, every stirrup leather passes through hands like yours first. Grubby, tired 15-year-old hands, cracked at the knuckles from the cold, stained black with harness oil, trembling slightly at all times. The smell of the armoury is in your clothes, in your hair, under your fingernails. It never leaves. Charcoal and hot metal from the forge next door. Neat's foot oil, thick and yellow smelling, worked into leather until your palms shine. The sharp vinegar bite of the sand and urine mix used to scour rust from mail. Horse, always horse, from the stables 30 yards upwind, and under everything the river. The Thames at Greenwich has its own smell, mud and salt and tar and fish, and at low tide on a warm day it climbs the palace walls and gets into the bread. Welcome to the court of young Henry VIII. It is the most dazzling place in England, and from where you stand it is mostly work. You need to dress this lance. The king rides at 10. Your hands know the job even while your mind is still shaking. Set the shaft on the trestles. Check the grain along its whole length, turning it slow, eyes 6 inches from the wood, fingertips following your eyes because fingers find what eyes miss. Fit the vamplate, the flared steel cone that guards the hand, and it grinds on, metal on wood, a sound like a knife on a whetstone, and it has to seat tight because a loose vamplate slides back on impact and breaks fingers, even royal fingers. Wax the grip. Check the coronal, the little 3-pronged crown of blunt steel at the tip that spreads the impact so the lance breaks instead of the man. Run your thumb over each prong, cold, rounded, good. 13 feet, perhaps 14 pounds. It doesn't sound like much until you have to hold it level at arm's length for the count of 10, which Guillot makes you do with every lance you dress, because if it whips or bows under its own weight, the balance is wrong. By the count of 6, your shoulder is burning. By 8, your arm has begun to shudder. You hold it. 10, down. Outside, the tiltyard is filling with sound. Hooves on packed sand, a horse blowing hard through its nose, the flat clap of a groom's hand on a muscled neck. Men's voices, and above them one voice, higher and brighter than the rest, laughing at something. You know that laugh. Everyone in Greenwich knows that laugh. It carries across a courtyard the way a trumpet does. The king is early. You carry the lance out into the light, and the cold hits your face like a wet cloth. It is late April, and the morning sun is out, but the wind is coming straight off the river, and it goes through your jerkin like the jerkin isn't there. The tiltyard at Greenwich is a long rectangle of raked sand between the palace and the park wall with the tilt itself, the wooden barrier the riders run along, stretching down the middle like a fence with delusions. At one end, the towers of the palace rise up in red brick, rank upon rank of glass windows catching the sun, more glass in one wall than exists in your entire home village. At the other end, the viewing gallery, empty this morning except for 2 clerks and a greyhound, and in the middle of the sand, surrounded by grooms and gentlemen and one anxious master of the horse, is the King of England, and he is arguing about a saddle. You've seen him perhaps 200 times by now, and it still catches you somewhere under the ribs every time, the sheer unlikely size of him. 6'2", and not lanky with it, not stretched thin the way tall boys usually are, but built through the chest and shoulders like the men who unload the coal barges, except that coal heavers don't glow. That's the only word for it. He is 18 years old. His skin is bright with cold and exercise. His hair under the flat velvet cap is the colour of a new-struck angel coin, and he's standing with his weight on one leg in white hose, and a doublet of cloth of silver worth more than every building you have ever slept in, arguing cheerfully with his master of the horse about whether the war saddle grips him too tight in the seat. It holds me like a nursemaid, Thomas. I cannot move in it. I might as well be nailed on. That is somewhat the purpose of it, your grace. The purpose of it is that I strike well and am not struck. A man nailed to his horse strikes like a sack of grain. He sees the lances coming, you and 2 other boys, each with a dressed shaft upright on your shoulder, and his whole face opens. Ah, now here is the morning arrived at last. He comes toward you. This is the part they don't warn you about. Kings are supposed to stay at a fixed distance like the sun, and instead this one crosses the sand in 5 strides and takes the lance off your shoulder himself, hefts it, spins the grip in his palm to feel the wax, and sights down the shaft with one blue eye shut. All before the master of the horse can finish clearing his throat. You stand absolutely still. You're close enough to smell him. Clean sweat, rosewater, leather, and horse, and close enough to see the faint golden stubble on his jaw, and the small scab on the knuckle of his right thumb where a bowstring took the skin off 2 days ago. Kings are not supposed to have scabs. This one is covered in the small honest damage of a man who uses his body hard. A yellowing bruise on the forearm, a torn nail, a fresh red graze along the heel of his hand. Good wood, he says, to no one, to the lance itself. Then his eye comes around the vamplate and lands on you, and your stomach drops through the sand. Whose work? Master Guillot has appeared from nowhere the way he does. The boy dressed it, your grace. I passed it. The boy has a name. There's silence of maybe 1 full second in which you forget your name, your father's name, the name of your village, and possibly the name of God. Will Dunmore, your grace. Dunmore? He says it the way he says everything, as if it delights him. Well, Will Dunmore, if it breaks fair you'll have my thanks, and if it breaks foul I suppose I shall have no further opinions on anything. He laughs at his own joke, a big unguarded laugh, head back, and the gentlemen laugh with him, and he is already turning away, already calling for his horse, and you are left standing in the sand with your heart hammering and the knowledge cold as the wind that the King of England just made a joke about the exact thing that kept you awake half the night. They armour him by the rail. This is its own performance, and you are part of the machinery of it, running buckles and points from the shed, kneeling in the cold sand to lace the leg harness, while a gentleman 10 times your rank holds the cuisse in place above you. 60 pounds of Milanese steel goes onto that big body piece by piece. Greaves, cuisses, breastplate, backplate, pauldrons like polished shoulders of ice, and he stands through it loose and easy, chatting over your heads, rolling each joint as it's closed to test the play. Your fingers are numb. The points, the little waxed laces that tie plate to the arming doublet, are stiff with cold, and your knuckles are cracked, and one of the cracks has opened and is bleeding thinly onto the lace, and you keep working because that is the job. Thread, pull, knot, thread, pull, knot. The steel is so cold it burns your fingertips when you steady it. Under your knees the sand is damp and gritty, and the damp is soaking through your hose. Then the helm goes on, and the most talkative king in Europe becomes a man of metal with a slot for eyes, and something in the yard changes. The grooms stop chatting. The horse, a big bay Neapolitan courser, itself armoured across the chest, starts to dance, because horses know. You hand up the lance. His gauntlet closes around the grip you waxed above the crack you didn't hide, and for a moment the whole weight of the thing hangs between your hands and his. "Stand clear," says the master of the horse. "You stand clear." What happens next takes 4 seconds, and you will remember it the rest of your life. And here is the thing you must understand. This is not sport the way you might imagine sport. 2 large men on half-ton horses ride at each other at a closing speed of perhaps 30 miles an hour, each aiming 13 feet of ash at the other's head and chest, and the entire safety system consists of steel, wood, and hope. Men die doing this, not occasionally, regularly. Kings die doing this. Everyone in this yard knows that a king of France died at the tilt with a splinter through his eye within living memory, and everyone in this yard has privately imagined it happening here, on this sand, on their shift. The flag drops. The bay goes from stillness to gallop in 3 strides, and the sound of it comes up through the ground into your feet, a rolling thunder you feel in your back teeth. Down the far side of the tilt comes Sir Thomas Knivet, one of the king's own wild young friends, no man's coward. Lance dropping into line. The gap closes. Your fingernails are in your palms. The impact is not like anything you can compare it to. It is a crack and a boom in the same instant, wood exploding, both lances bursting into flying white splinters that spin end over end and rain down on the sand, and the king rocks in the saddle, rocks, absorbs it, rides through it, and comes out the far end of the tilt standing in his stirrups with the broken butt of your lance held up over his head like a trophy, and you can hear him whooping inside the helm. Broke fair. Both lances, clean on the body, splinters thrown forward and away. The clerks in the gallery mark their tallies. Sir Thomas is laughing and swearing at the same time, working his shoulder in its socket. Your legs are water. You go and pick splinters out of the sand, because that is also the job. And the splinters are sharp enough to open your finger if you grab them wrong. And each one you collect is a piece of a thing that could have killed the King of England and instead made him whoop like a boy let out of school. He runs 8 more courses that morning. He breaks his lance in 6 of them, which is a very good rate, and takes 2 solid hits that would put an ordinary man in bed, and when the helm finally comes off, his hair is soaked flat and dark with sweat. His face is scarlet. There is a bruise already rising along his jaw where the padding drove into it, and he is grinning like the whole world has been arranged for his particular pleasure. "Again tomorrow," he tells the master of the horse, "and find me someone who hits harder than Nivet. I felt the last 3 like a knock at the door I wasn't obliged to answer." That's the young Henry nobody tells you about. Not cruel, not yet even suspicious. just an enormous, gifted, restless, dangerous boy, burning through horses and lances and the nerves of everyone around him, in love with his own body and what it could do. And you gather the wreckage, you carry 60 pounds of sweat-soaked steel back to the shed piece by piece, and you spend the rest of the daylight scouring it, oiling it, and hanging it, until your shoulders are 2 knots of fire, and your hands smell so strongly of neat's foot oil that at supper you can taste it in the bread. You came to this, you chose this. And to understand why a farmer's third son from Kent is bleeding into a king's laces, you have to go back a year and 4 months to a wagon, a letter, and the coldest January of your life, January of 1509. The old king, the 7th Henry, is still alive, though the whole country whispers that he is dying by inches in his privy chamber at Richmond, thin as a rake handle, coughing blood into linen cloths that the laundresses burn. You know none of this yet. You are 13. You're the third son of a man who farms 40 acres near Sevenoaks in Kent, and your future consists of whichever of your brothers dies first. But your mother has a cousin, and the cousin married a saddler, and the saddler supplies harness leather to a Fleming named Guyot at the King's Armoury at Greenwich. And one evening at Christmas the saddler drinks enough of your father's ale to say that Guyot is short a boy, because the last one crushed 2 fingers under a dropped anvil block and went home, and your father looks at you across the fire the way a man looks at a debt that might finally pay out. 7 years, the indenture says. You cannot read it, but the priest reads it to you. 7 years bound to Master Guyot of the Armoury, to serve, obey, keep his counsel, not haunt taverns, not marry, not play at dice, in exchange for bed, board, and the mystery of his craft. Your father makes his mark, you make yours. Your mother sews 2 shillings into the waistband of your hose where thieves won't find them, presses her thumb hard between your eyes the way she does, and doesn't cry until she thinks the wagon is too far down the lane for you to see. You see. The wagon takes 2 days to make 30 miles because it is January, and the roads are rivers of half-frozen mud that suck the wheels down to the axle, and you spend most of the second day walking beside it because the horses can't pull your weight too, and by the time Greenwich rises up out of the river mist your feet have gone from agony to a distant frozen rumour. And then you forget your feet, because you've never seen anything like this, and there is nothing like this, not in Kent, not in England, hardly in the world. The palace runs along the south bank of the Thames for what looks like 1/4 of a mile. Red brick and glass, towers and courts and gardens behind walls, with the friary church at one end and the river lapping at its skirts, and smoke rising from more chimneys than your whole village has houses. They call it the Palace of Placentia, which the saddler tells you means the pleasant place. The old king rebuilt it. The new king, though nobody yet says the new king out loud, because the old one is still technically breathing, was born here, in this brick honeycomb by the water, 17.5 years ago. Master Guyot looks at your hands before he looks at your face, turns them over, presses the palms with his thumb, bends the fingers back. "Farm boy," he says, like a diagnosis. "Good. Farm boys know that work doesn't stop because you're tired. Those are the first words your master ever speaks to you, and it will be 4 months before he says anything as long again. You sleep in a loft above the harness room with 2 other boys, Hal and Peterkin, on a straw mattress that all 3 of you share, under blankets that smell of horse, and the first night you lie awake listening to the rats in the thatch and the bells of the friary and the strange huge silence of 500 sleeping people, and you cry a little, quietly, with your face turned to the wall, and in the morning Hal, who is 16 and has been here 3 years, looks at your swollen eyes and says only, "Everyone does. Don't do it during the day, that's all. The work at first is not the mystery of the craft. The work is everything the craft rests on. You haul charcoal for the forge until your shoulders unlearn straightness, sack after sack after sack, and the black dust gets into the creases of your neck and stays there until Sunday. You pump the bellows in long, slow strokes, and the heat of the forge chars your face on one side, while the January air freezes the other, so that you're always half roasted and half frozen like a badly turned goose. You scour mail, hundreds of thousands of riveted rings that rust if a man breathes on them, rolled in a barrel with sand and vinegar, and the barrel weighs more than you do, and you turn it until your arms shake, and then you turn it more. You learn that steel plate is wiped down with a slightly oily rag every single time human skin touches it, because the salt in fingerprints etches rust into the polish overnight, a perfect little ghost of the hand of whichever fool touched it, and you can look at that ghost and know from the size of the fingers exactly which boy to beat. You're hungry all the time, though there is more food here than at home. Bread and pottage in the morning, bread and cheese and sometimes salt fish at midday, bread and pottage at night, and small beer with all of it because nobody with sense drinks the water. Your body is growing an inch every few months and burning everything you put into it, and Peterkin teaches you the great secret of palace life, which is friendship with the kitchen, specifically friendship with a scullion named Mag, who is 14 and freckled and works in the boiling house, and who can be relied upon, in exchange for a mended buckle or a sharpened knife, to produce the ends of pies. The ends of pies, you learn, are the foundation of the entire below-stairs economy of the Palace of Placentia. And then, in April, the old king dies at Richmond, and the world turns over. You're scouring a barrel of mail when the bells begin. First the friary, close and deep, then across the river, then more, further, fainter, until the whole grey horizon is trembling with them, every church in every parish ringing at once, and Hal stops the barrel with his hand and says, "That's it then." You expect grief. What comes instead over the following days is something you have no word for. It is spring, and the 17-year-old prince is proclaimed king, and it is as if the whole country exhales at once. You have to understand what the old king's last years felt like from below. Taxes and bonds and fines, 2 grey lawyers named Empson and Dudley squeezing money out of anyone with money to squeeze, informers, suspicion, an old sick man counting coins behind closed doors, and now, suddenly, this golden boy. Within weeks the new king arrests Empson and Dudley, the 2 most hated men in England, and the crowds cheer in the streets. He announces he will marry Catherine of Aragon, his brother's widow, the little auburn-haired Spanish princess who has been kept waiting in shabby limbo for 7 years, and the ballad singers turn it into a love story by Sunday. In June he is crowned at Westminster, and the conduits in London run with wine, actual wine, free, in the streets, and Peterkin goes up by boat to see it, and comes back drunk and sunburned with half a roast chicken in his shirt, and says the crowds tore the cloth of the coronation route to pieces for keepsakes, and a man was nearly trampled to death for a yard of ray cloth. A poet, you hear this years later, but I'll give it to you now, writes that heaviness has vanished and that avarice has fled the realm, that this is the end of a long winter. That is what it felt like. Whatever came after, and you know what came after, you must hold this in your head tonight. In 1509, Henry VIII was the happy ending. He was the good news. He was the most promising young man in Europe, and no one, not the ambassadors, not the old councillors, not the boy scouring mail in the Greenwich armoury, no one saw anything else coming. And for the armoury, the new reign means one thing above all others. Master Guillaume says it the morning after the coronation, standing in the forge doorway with his arms crossed, looking at the three of you like a man surveying insufficient firewood before a long winter. The old king watched jousts, he says. This one rides in them. Sleep well tonight. It is the last time. He's not entirely joking, because here is what nobody outside a tiltyard understands about a jousting king. The old king, whatever else he was cheap and careful kings are easy on armouries. The new king is neither. Within a month the orders begin. New harness, new saddles, new lances by the gross. 12 dozen at a time, because a good day's sport can splinter 40 of them. Repairs, alterations, refits, because the king is 18 and still growing, and his chest measurement changes between Michaelmas and Easter. And soon, word that the king is not satisfied with buying his armour from Flanders and Italy, like his fathers did, that he means to bring the best armourers in Europe to England and set up royal workshops of his own here at Greenwich, so that England will make harness to shame Milan. Master Guillaume hears this and says nothing, but that evening he works until midnight with a face like a man reading his own future in the fire, because Flemish and Italian and German masters coming to Greenwich means the world is about to get very crowded for a Flemish master already at Greenwich. But all that is still ahead. What matters in that first summer of the reign is simpler. The king is coming to the tiltyard, not once, constantly. And the distance between you and the most powerful man in England is about to shrink to the length of a lace. The strange thing about the new king, the thing that takes you months to believe, is that at first he isn't allowed to joust at all. Think about that. The most physically capable monarch in Europe, the boy built like a siege engine, and his own council will not let him run at the tilt against another man, because he is the whole Tudor dynasty walking around in one body. His father spent 24 years and a civil war's worth of blood securing that throne. There is no spare. There is a sister married into Scotland and another sister still a child, and a heap of Plantagenet cousins that nobody wants to think about, and that is it. If a lance goes through that helm, England doesn't lose a king. England possibly loses the peace itself. Everyone over 40 at court remembers what the wars felt like. So the old men hedge him about, and the young king runs at the ring instead, spearing a hanging hoop at the gallop which needs a marvellous eye and steady hand and cannot kill him. And he casts the bar, and wrestles and plays tennis and shoots, and watches other men do the one thing he wants most, with his jaw set in a way that anyone who knew what was coming in 20 years might have studied more carefully. And then, in January of 1510, 8 months into the reign, he simply stops asking permission. You're not at Richmond when it happens, but Hal has it within a week from a groom who was there, and the story runs through the household like fire through stubble. A private joust is held at Richmond Park. Among the riders come 2 knights, unknown, visors down, no names given, and the 2 strangers run course after course, and one of them is enormous, and rides like the wrath of God, and breaks lance after lance until somebody— the groom swears it was a wager, others say a woman recognised the seat of him, until somebody lets it out. The big stranger is the king, sneaked into his own joust in disguise against the wishes of his own council, like a prentice slipping out to a fair. The court chooses to be delighted, because what else can the court be? The old men age a year in an afternoon. That is the pattern of him, you learn, the disguises most of all. He loves them the way children love them, with total commitment and the unshakable conviction that no one can tell. That same January he and 11 gentlemen burst into the Queen's chamber at Westminster, dressed as Robin Hood's outlaws, in short green coats, hoods over their faces, bows in hand, and the Queen and her ladies perform astonishment, great, gracious, obviously rehearsed by life astonishment, because Catherine is 24 and clever, and has learned exactly what her huge young husband needs, and there is dancing before dinner, and the outlaws unmask, and behold, the tallest outlaw is the king, and everyone marvels, and he is so pleased. You hear all this from Mag, who hears it from a Westminster scullion, and the two of you sit on the boiling-house step sharing the end of a pie, and trying to imagine being the kind of person for whom the entire world agrees to be a play. Do you think the Queen knows it's him every time? Mag asks. His own mother would know him by the back of his neck at 1/2 a mile. He's the size of a church door. Then she's kind, says Mag, licking her fingers. That's a kind of work too, being that surprised that often. Remember Mag saying that. It is the truest thing anyone says to you in 7 years at court. By spring the council's resistance collapses the way everyone knew it would, and the king jousts openly, and your life divides into the days he rides and the days he doesn't. On the days he doesn't, the armoury is merely hard. On the days he does, it is a held breath from darkness to darkness. Those mornings begin at 4 in the black cold, when Guillaume's boot on the ladder shakes the loft. You break the ice skin on the water butt with your fist and wash your face and neck, because Guillaume will send a boy back to do it who comes down dirty. Not for cleanliness, he says, but because a boy who won't govern his own neck won't govern a buckle. You eat standing. Then the harness comes down from its pegs in the dark, piece by candlelight, and every piece is inspected twice. Once by the boy who carries it, once by Guillaume, whose thumbnail travels every strap, every rivet, every point, in a silence so total you can hear the candle flame. A strap that shows cracking at the buckle holes is replaced, not mended. A rivet that turns is drilled out. Straw is packed into panniers, steel is nested into straw, and the whole glittering anatomy of a king is carried out across the dark wet grass to the tiltyard shed, on the shoulders of boys, while the stars are still out and the river mist lies over the park like spilled milk, and somewhere a fox screams, and Peterkin every single time says, "Someone's being murdered," and every single time Hal says, "It's a fox." And this too is part of the ritual. This is how you keep the fear small, because the fear is there, always, underneath. You're all afraid all the time, a little, not of the king, for him. It is a strange thing to carry, fear on behalf of a man who has never once been afraid in your sight, and it makes a strange loyalty, deeper than the loyalty of wages. His safety lives in your fingers. You dream about laces. You dream, one terrible night, that you find the crack in the lance after the course is run, standing in red sand, and you wake with a shout with Hal's hand already over your mouth, because boys who shout at night wake the harness room, and the harness room complains to Guyot. And the king himself. The king is glorious that year, and it costs him nothing, and it costs everyone around him everything, and he has no idea, and that, not the cruelty. There is no cruelty yet. That innocence of cost is the first true thing you ever understand about princes. You see it up close on a morning in May, when he comes to the armoury itself. No warning, of course. He simply arrives, ducking under the lintel. He has to duck under every lintel of his life, with two gentlemen trailing him and the light behind him, and the whole shop freezes mid-motion like a household in a fairy story, hammers in the air, and he says, "As you were, masters, I am only here to be measured, and no one is as they were. No one is ever as they were again once he has been in a room. They are fitting him for new harness, and measuring a king for armour is intimate the way tailoring is intimate, except the tailor's mistakes only embarrass you, and the armourer's mistakes kill you." He strips to shirt and hose in the middle of the shop, entirely unbothered, talking the whole time, and Guyot moves around him with the knotted measuring cords, calling numbers in Flemish to Hal, who scratches them on a slate, and you're put to holding the cord's loose ends, which means you spend half an hour of your life standing close enough to the King of England to count his eyelashes. The measurements themselves will survive, by the way, in the harness he leaves behind. This is me talking now, not the boy, and they say what the boy's eyes say. A chest of 42 inches, a waist of some 32, maybe 35, 6'2". Remember those numbers. Hold them against the numbers from the end of his life. The 54-inch waist, the 57-inch chest, the leg that would not heal, the machines they built to haul him upstairs. Same man, same body, 30 years apart. The armour remembers both of him with total honesty, and it is the saddest biography in steel that exists anywhere in the world. But that is 30 years away, and this morning he is warm to stand near, like a wall the sun has been on, and he asks Guyot questions, real questions, good questions, about the throat of the helm, about why the German masters flute their steel, and whether fluting truly stiffens the plate or only flatters it, and he listens to the answers. That is the thing your fingers remember most, stranger than the size of him. He listens. He argues a point about the pauldron's articulation, and Guyot, who has never in your sight yielded a point to anyone, walks him through the geometry of a shoulder with grease pencil sketches on the bench, and the King of England leans over the bench on his forearms like a prentice, nodding, and says, "Yes, yes, I see it. You have the right of it, master, and I was wrong," and says it easily, laughing, because he is young, and it costs him nothing yet to be wrong about small things. He notices your hands at the end. You've been holding cord for half an hour, and your knuckles are cracked from the scouring vinegar, 2 of them open and raw. He takes your wrist. The king takes your wrist. His hand goes all the way around it, turns it over, looks at the damage, and says, not unkindly, to Guyot, "Your boys pay for my sport, I see." "Everything's paid for by someone, your grace," says Guyot. The king looks at that answer the way he looked at the lance, weighing it down its length. For one heartbeat, something older than 18 looks out of the blue eyes. Then it is gone, and he flips a coin at you, an actual coin, spinning gold in the forged light, and you catch it against your chest with both cracked hands, and he says, "For the knuckles, Will Dunmore," and is gone through the door in a smell of rosewater and horse, and the shop breathes again. He remembered your name. 4 weeks and 200 servants after hearing it once. Hal says he does it constantly, that it is a trick, a gift, that his grandfather Edward had it too, the trick of making the room fall in love. Guyot says nothing, but that night at the bench he looks at the gold half-angel you cannot stop turning in your fingers, and says the second longest thing he will ever say to you. Keep it. Spend the memory carefully, though. A prince's kindness is weather, boy. It is real, and it is warm, and it is nothing you can build on. The men who mistake weather for a roof, he goes back to his gauntlet. We will see some of those men, you and I. Watch what happens to them. You are 15. You think he's being sour because the king argued him about pauldrons and lost graciously, which is somehow worse than losing. You keep the coin in the waistband seam where your mother's shillings lived. You do not understand him at all. You will. Summer teaches you the full catalogue of him, because the tilt is only one room in the house of his energy, and the household learns his rhythms the way sailors learn weather. There is tennis. Not the lawn game. This is real tennis, the indoor kind, played in a walled court with a sloping roof along one side, a net drooping in the middle, and a hard ball of packed cloth and hair that comes off his racket fast enough to raise a welt through wool. The king plays it obsessively for money, stripped to his shirt, and the shirt goes translucent with sweat inside 20 minutes. And the Venetian ambassador, a man paid to be unimpressed, writes home that it is the prettiest thing in the world to see him play, his fair skin glowing through the fine linen. The whole court crowds the gallery to watch and to bet. You see it once, sent over with a repaired racket press, and you stand in the doorway for as long as you dare, and what stays with you is the sound, the boom of the ball off the penthouse roof, the squeak and slam of his feet and his voice, constantly calling the score, disputing a chase, laughing, needling his opponent. He cannot do anything silently, this man. His body and his voice are one instrument. There is wrestling, which frightens you more than the tilt in some ways, because at least at the tilt he wears steel. He wrestles Cornish style and Breton style, gripping and throwing, against the biggest men of his guard, and he almost always wins, and you stop wondering whether the guardsmen let him win the day you watch him take a genuine, unplanned fall, thrown clean over a hip, flat on his back on the grass, a sound like a felled tree, and come up not angry but delighted, wild with delight, wiping blood from his lip and calling for the same throw again, slower so he can learn it. A man who fixes his matches does not ask to be shown the throw that beat him. Whatever else you'll hear about young Henry, hear this. The strength was real, the skill was real, and the courage, the plain physical courage, was completely real. It is the thing the later legend steals from him. Everyone remembers the tyrant. Nobody remembers that the tyrant at 18 would stand and trade falls with men who broke bones for a living and love them for hitting him. Honestly, there is the longbow. On this take an armoury boy's word. The king shoots like a yeoman, which is the highest compliment the yard knows how to pay. England is a bow culture from the ankles up. There is law, actual statute law, requiring men to practice at the butts, and Henry can stand with the archers of his guard and match them, drawing a war-weight bow over and over, which is not a thing a body does by being royal. It is a thing a body does by 10,000 honest repetitions, beginning in childhood, building the specific twisted strength that bowmen carry in their backs. You fletch and you haul targets and you dig spent arrows out of the earth butts with your fingers until your nails are packed black, and you watch him loose shaft after shaft into the white, and Hal says quietly, his grandfather's blood. Say what you like about the Yorkists, they could shoot. And when the body finally stops, the music starts. This is the part that never fits inside the legend, so let me nail it to the wall. The same man who breaks lances all morning composes music, genuinely composes it, well, masses, motets, songs the court is still singing decades later. He plays the lute, the virginals, the recorder, the organ. He sits up past midnight setting parts for 4 voices and in the morning sometimes a boy carrying charcoal through the lower court can hear, from a high window, the King of England picking through a new melody. Wrong note, again, wrong note, again, right note, again, again, again. The same iron patience he brings to the wrestling throw. And there is one song of his that you will carry your whole life, because that summer the whole palace hums it, kitchen to stable, the way a tune owns a household, pastime with good company it goes. I love and shall until I die. He wrote it. The monster of the story, you know, wrote the catchiest song in England about how much he loved his friends, his sport, his life, and meant every word. And the terrible thing, the thing that will keep you awake when you are old, is that he did mean it. That is the man you served. Both things are true. That is the whole lesson of him, and there is no getting comfortable inside it. The palace that holds all this is a machine, and from below stairs you learn its gearing. Perhaps 800 souls follow the court, more at feast times. The kitchens at Greenwich burn wood by the wagon load and turn whole oxen. The spicery smells like heaven's own cupboard and is guarded like the mint. The buttery issues beer by the ton. A ton. Look at a cart and imagine the barrel that fills it. Because everyone from the king to the boy who scares crows off the fish ponds drinks beer. Morning to night. Small weak beer mostly, but an ocean of it. Mag works the boiling house now, and her forearms are scalded in a lace pattern that will never leave her. Pale specks and streaks, and she is proud of them the way you're getting proud of your hands, which are becoming knuckle by cracked knuckle, an armourer's hands, leather palmed, oil dark in the creases, strong past what your size explains. You are growing. 16 now. The work has rebuilt you. You can carry the charcoal sacks 2 at a time, and last Lady Day, Guillot, without one word, moved you from the scouring barrel to the bench to real work, riveting and strapping and fitting, and the first time you close a rivet perfectly, one clean mushroom of bright steel, tight, true. He picks up the piece, looks at it in the light for about a year, and says, again, which from Guillot is a feast day sermon of praise. And through it all, over it all, the king burns like a bonfire you can see from every window. Progress in summer, hunting until the horses founder, disguisings at every feast, one night Turks, one night shepherds, one night, God help everyone, he and his gentlemen dressed as strangers from a mysterious land in gold and crimson. Money going out of the treasury his careful father spent a lifetime filling in a sparkling river, on cloth of gold, on jewels, on gun founding, on ships, on the wages of trumpeters, on the new armoury workshops, on the endless glittering theatre of a young Renaissance king, announcing to Europe that England is no longer a rainy afterthought ruled by an accountant. The old councillors watch the river of money and clutch their heads. The young men, Knivet, Brandon, Neville, Compton, the wild ones who ride and revel with him, watch it and hold out their hats out there. And the Queen, little Auburn Catherine, watches her enormous husband with an expression you see exactly once, at close range, on a June evening when the court comes down to the tiltyard and you're holding a stirrup, and the king rides a course just to make her gasp, and breaks his lance perfectly, and pulls off his helm laughing to look for her face. And her face, in that second before it becomes a queen's face again, is the face of a woman who was left on a shelf in a foreign country for 7 years and then handed the sun. They are happy. Write that down somewhere in yourself. In 1510, Henry and Catherine of Aragon are happy, actually happy. And that autumn the whole palace knows the reason her waist is thickening, and the king goes about with the particular unbearable radiance of a large young man about to have everything. On New Year's Day, 1511, at Richmond, the Queen gives birth to a son, a living son, a prince. They name him Henry, of course. The dynasty, that single golden thread the old men have been fretting over since the coronation, doubles overnight, and England goes gently insane. Bonfires in the London streets, bells until the bells ache, free wine again at the conduits, guns booming from the tower so that the river shivers. At Greenwich you hear the tower guns as a soft repeated thunder rolling downriver through the winter mist, and Peterkin climbs onto the woodpile and crows like a rooster, until Guillot pulls him down by the belt, and even Guillot, you see it, you're looking right at him. Even Guillot is smiling. Wine comes down to the yard, real wine, sent to every corner of the household, and you drink your cup by the forge with your ears ringing and think, I will remember being warm exactly here, exactly now. And the king who does nothing quietly, announces that he will give thanks the way he understands best. A tournament. Not a tournament. The tournament. 2 days at Westminster in February, the greatest feat of arms England has seen in living memory. Pageants, disguisings, a banquet to beg a description. All of it for Catherine, all of it for the boy in the cradle. The heralds proclaim it. The challengers will ride under invented names, like knights in a romance, and the king's own name is chosen and stitched and painted onto everything before January is out. Cœur loyal, Sir Loyal Heart. The order lands on the armoury like a falling wall. Every harness, every saddle steel, every lance, lances by the 100, through your hands in 5 weeks in the dead of winter. Guillot reads the schedule, folds it, puts it in his apron and says, Sleep now, whoever can. And I need you to hold 2 things in your mind as we go down into those 5 weeks, because history is holding them too, just out of the boy's sight. The first, this tournament will be the peak, the absolute summit of young Henry's world, the brightest hour he will ever have, brighter than any victory, any wedding, any crown. The second thing, the boy does not know, the king does not know, no one in England knows. The baby has 7 weeks to live. The 5 weeks before Westminster are the hardest of your life so far, and they begin with a lesson in what winter does to a forge yard. The cold that January is a live thing. The water butts freeze to the bottom and have to be broken with a maul. The oil goes thick as honey and has to be warmed by the fire before it will work into leather at all. Steel left outside overnight will take the skin off a bare palm. You watch a new boy, a little Welsh lad called Owen, grab a frosted breastplate with wet hands and leave 2 grey patches of himself on the metal. And after that Guillot makes a rule, spoken in his shortest voice, gloves or blood, choose in the morning. You work from dark to dark and then past it, by tallow candle or the horn lantern, and the work has a rhythm that gets into your sleep. Cut, punch, rivet. Cut, punch, rivet. Strap ends by the 100, each one skived thin with a knife that has to be stropped every dozen cuts, and the skiving knife lives so long in your right hand that when you finally put it down at night, your fingers stay curled around the ghost of it, and have to be straightened one by one with the other hand, and they crack when they straighten. All 4 knuckles like green wood in a fire. Your back learns a new ache, low down, from stooping to the bench, an ache that is there when you lie down and there when you get up. And Hal shows you the trick the old hands use, a rolled strip of blanket tied hard around the loins, and it helps, some, and mostly you just learn what every craftsman before you learned, which is that the body keeps working long after it has lodged its complaint, and that there is a strange dark comfort on the far side of exhaustion, a place where the hands go on without you and the mind floats just behind them, watching. The lances come in by barge, raw staves from the wharf, and are carried up through the frozen garden on boys' shoulders, and the frost makes the staves slick, and Peterkin goes down hard on the river stairs with two of them, and opens his scalp on the stone, and bleeds the way scalps bleed, terrifyingly, everywhere, and is back at the bench in an hour with a rag tied round his head like a Turk in a disguising grinning, because the alternative to grinning is thinking about the schedule. Twice in those weeks riders come down from Westminster with changes. The King's Grace desires the bases of the harness altered. The King's Grace has devised a new fashion of skirt for the horse. The King's Grace, in short, is doing what he always does, which is designing, meddling, improving, unable to leave any beloved thing alone, and Guillaume receives each change standing in the yard with the messenger's paper in his fist and says, each time, only, it shall be done, and then turns back into the shop and reorganises the labour of 30 men without raising his voice. You understand, watching him in those weeks, that you are apprenticed to a kind of general. That calm is a craft too. You are learning it the way you learnt riveting, by standing close to a master while he does it 10,000 times. And once, one single evening in the middle of the madness, the work stops. It is Candlemas Eve, the 2nd of February, and you're at the bench late, alone, finishing a girth, when you become aware that the yard outside has gone strange. Quiet, but a full quiet, a crowded quiet. You go to the door. Snow is coming down in fat slow flakes, the first real snow of the year, and the whole yard, grooms, kitchen boys, 2 laundresses, a scullion, Mag with her sleeves still steaming from the coppers, is standing in it, faces up, catching it. Nobody is speaking. The snow is hissing very faintly in the forge chimney and building fur on the wood pile, and the palace windows are gold behind the falling white, and from somewhere up in that gold, faint, you can hear music, viols and voices. They are rehearsing the pageant songs for Westminster. Mag comes and stands next to you in the doorway, and the two of you listen, and the snow settles on her hair. "That's him," she says. "It might be." One of the voices under the viols is deep and sure. It might be anyone. "It's him," she says again, deciding it, and you let her have it, because it is Candlemas Eve, and there is snow and music, and you are 16, and some nights you choose what is true. "When the prince is grown," Mag says, "we'll be old. 40 maybe. He'll be king, and we'll say we were here the winter he was born, and no one will believe how it was. How was it?" you ask her, because you genuinely want to know what this looks like from inside the boiling house. She thinks about it catching snow on her scarred forearm, watching it die there. "Like the whole country got let out of a small room," she says. Then Guillaume's voice from inside. "Dunmore, the girth. Back to the bench. Cut. Punch. Rivet." But you carry that doorway with you through everything that comes after, and you should carry it too, listener, because you now know something no one standing in that snow knew, and it changes nothing about the snow. The happiness was real. It was real while it lasted. That has to be worth something, or nothing is. The court moves upriver to Westminster in the 2nd week of February, and the armoury moves with it, the tournament harness crated in straw, barge after barge, and you go up with the third barge, your first time on the river in anything grander than a wherry, sitting on a crate of the king's own steel with your breath smoking, watching London assemble itself out of the mist. The bridge with its houses, the tower, squat and pale on its hill of walls, wharves, cranes, a forest of masts, and the smell of the city arriving before the city does. Sea coal smoke, tanneries, fish, and under it that same river mud smell as home, so that the biggest city in the kingdom announces itself to your nose as a larger Greenwich, which is roughly what it is. Westminster is not London, you learn. It is its own town upriver, the town of the king and the law and the abbey, and the tiltyard has been built in the old palace grounds, stands and galleries hammered up in fresh yellow timber, tiers of them, and a gallery hung in cloth of gold and purple velvet for the Queen. You spend 2 days in a canvas-roofed armoury shed at the yard's end, in a state of terror-tinged wonder, checking harness that has already been checked, while carpenters bang overhead and heralds argue precedence and a whole pageant wagon, an actual rolling forest, a fake forest on wheels, with silk leaves and a golden lion and men inside it to make it walk, is trundled past your door as if that were a normal thing that happens in the world. And then it is the 12th of February, and the 12th of February 1511 is, by the reckoning of everyone who was there and everyone who has studied it since, the single most magnificent day of Henry VIII's entire life. Hold on to me now. We're going in. The morning of the tournament, you're up at 3, and the yard at 3 is a village of lanterns, torches at the shed doors, torches along the tilt, breath smoke everywhere, and the sound of the day assembling itself in the dark. Hammers, hooves, a trumpeter warming his lips somewhere with low farting notes that will be silver fanfares by 10, and the crowd already gathering beyond the barriers hours early in the frozen dark, because all of Westminster and half of London means to see this. Your work begins with the horse's steel and ends with the king's, and in between there is no time to be awed, which is a mercy. The challengers ride under romance names, Sir Loyalheart himself, and with him 3 of his closest, styled as Valiant Desire, Good Valour, Joyous Thought, like men who have walked out of a poem, and each has harness and horse trappings in the shared livery, and the trappings are the wonder of the age. Cloth of gold and purple velvet sewn, not painted sewn, all over with letters of solid gold. H and K, hundreds of them, the king's initial and the queen's, entwined and repeated until the horses look like they are wearing pages of scripture, and every single one of those letters is real bullion, and you know their weight personally because trappings must be lifted, and lifting them is like lifting a wet sail made of money. By mid-morning the stands are one packed roaring bank of faces, thousands of them, and the Queen is in her gallery under the cloth of gold. You see her from a distance, small and upright, 3 weeks a mother, the whole day built around her like a ring around a stone. And the fanfares finally come, real and silver, and the pageant forest rolls into the yard with its silk leaves shivering, and out of the forest, in full harness, on a horse dressed in gold letters, rides the king. The sound the crowd makes is not cheering. Cheering is what happens at the tilt. This is lower and bigger, a sound like the sea getting to its feet, and it goes through the ground and up through your boots exactly the way the galloping did, and the man at the centre of it lifts his lance to the gallery, to Catherine, to the mother of his son, and even at 80 yards, even through a war-helm slot, you would swear on relics that you can feel him grinning, and then, for 2 days, he is better than everyone. I want to be careful here, because you know how these stories usually go. The king wins because he is the king. The way the king's jokes are funny because they are the king's. Some of that is in the yard, certainly. Some men run soft courses at him, and everyone knows who they are, and so does he, and he hates it. But the score checks survive, the actual herald's tallies from those 2 days, and the plain arithmetic of them is this. Nobody at Westminster broke more lances than Sir Loyal Hart. He runs course after course after course, on the first day and the second, against the best men in the kingdom, and he hits with a consistency that has nothing to do with flattery, because a lance either breaks on the mark or it doesn't, and wood cannot be bribed. From the shed end you watch as much as the work allows, and the work barely allows, because broken lances have to be cleared, and fresh ones dressed and run out in a constant relay, and by afternoon your arms are past pain into a kind of humming numbness, and still the courses come, and still, again and again down the far end of your exhaustion, that crack boom, and the sea sound, and the big figure in gold standing in his stirrups. He is 20 years old. He has a healthy son 3 weeks old, a wife who loves him, a kingdom that adores him, the best body in England and the best day of his life. And the day knows it is the best day. That is the uncanny thing. There is a fever on the whole yard, a shine on everything, as if the sun itself had been sown with H and K. At night there is a banquet in the White Hall and a pageant, and what happens at that pageant is so perfectly, ridiculously true that no storyteller would dare invent it, and I need you to have it, 'cause nothing else in this whole night will show you the young king so exactly. After the dancing, the king, in his gold-lettered pageant clothes, is so pleased with the world that he makes a large gesture. He invites the watching crowd, and the hall is crammed, not just lords but gentlemen, officers, hangers-on, the outer rings of the court, to come and pluck the golden letters from his garments. Souvenirs, largesse, a king scattering himself like coins in the old open-handed style, the anti-father, the opposite of the counting-house. Take, he means, a letter or two, and remember, the crowd takes him at his word the way a wave takes a sandcastle. They strip him, not just him. They surge in and strip the whole company, tearing the gold letters off the King of England's actual body, and then the letters run out and they keep going, and the king is plucked down to his doublet and hose, and his gentlemen fare worse. Poor Thomas Knivet, your Knivet of the tiltyard, is stripped stark naked and ends up scrambling up a pillar out of the grabbing hands, clinging to it above the mob like a treed cat, bare as Adam, while the hall howls. The guard wade in, for a breath that could turn ugly, truly ugly, and the king laughs. He stands there in his torn shirt sleeves, robbed to the skin by his own subjects in his own hall, every plan of the evening in shreds around him, and he throws back his head and roars and declares the whole robbery largesse, all of it, let it all be for largesse, and orders the banquet to go forward, and sits down to eat in his ruined clothes with his naked friend fetched down and wrapped in somebody's gown, and the evening becomes not a disaster, but the story everyone will tell for 30 years. That is young Henry, whole in one scene, the vanity and the generosity fused so tight you cannot get a knife between them, the need to be magnificent and the genuine, unfakeable good humour when magnificence collapses on top of him. The crowd loves him because he is, at 20, at bottom, easy to love. Keep this night. In the story you already know, the story of the monster, keep this one night. when they tore the gold off him and he laughed. You hear it all third hand before dawn, in the shed, from a page who saw it, while you sit on a crate rubbing tallow into your split knuckles, too tired to hold your head up and too fired to sleep, and Peterkin makes you all howl doing Nevet on the pillar, using the tent pole, and Guyot lets him, which tells you Guyot is pleased, and Guyot is pleased because the harness held, every strap, every rivet, 2 days, no man of ours hurt, and the king's grace never in danger from anything except his own subjects' fingernails. You go back down to Greenwich by barge 2 days later, through a cold blue afternoon, with the crated steel and the ruined trappings. They send the trappings to the armoury too, what's left of them, gold-plucked and mud-hemmed, to be stripped for salvage, and you fall asleep sitting upright against a crate in the middle of the Thames, and Hal lets you sleep, and that is the end of the greatest week of the young king's life. 9 days later the bells begin again, and this time you know before anyone says it, because bells have grammar, and you've learned to read it. Fast and bright and tumbling over each other, that is joy. Slow, single, evenly spaced, one stroke rolling all the way to silence before the next. That is the other thing. The little prince is dead. Henry, Duke of Cornwall, aged 52 days. No one ever knows why. No one will ever know why. The age loses babies the way winter loses leaves, prince and pauper alike, and knows it, and has built itself a whole theology to survive it, and none of that helps at all, not one grain, not in the first hour. The news comes down from Richmond and moves through Greenwich the way cold water moves through a shirt. The kitchens go quiet. The yard goes quiet. Mag, who has never seen the child, who would never in her life have been let within 5 rooms of the child, sits down on the boiling house step with her apron over her face. And here is what I can tell you about the king and queen, from the records and the letters, because the boy in the armoury saw none of it, and I will not pretend he did. Catherine, they wrote, made great lamentation, grieved so hard that those around her feared for her health, and it was the king, the 20-year-old, the boy of the gold letters, who put his own grief down somewhere out of sight, and went to her, and comforted her, and reasoned with her gently that God's will must be borne, and made himself the steady one. Whatever you carry into tonight about Henry VIII and the women he ruined, and it is all true, and it is all coming, set this beside it, because it is also true. The first time Death walked into that marriage, he held her up. The tournament trappings are still in the armoury loft waiting for salvage. Nobody has had time, and so it falls out that on the day the court goes into mourning, you are sent up the ladder to begin unpicking the gold, and you spend that whole grey afternoon alone under the roof with a small sharp knife, cutting H after K after H off purple velvet, each letter releasing with a tiny dry tearing sound, dropping each one into a leather bag where it clinks on its brothers, the joy of the age converted back into bullion weight, letter by letter, while the slow bells strike outside, and somewhere upriver a 52-day reign of happiness is being measured for a coffin barely bigger than the bag on your knee. You are 16. It is the first time in your life you understand, all the way down, that gold is only ever borrowed thread. The court wears black, and grief does to the young king what it does to certain large animals. It makes him move. He cannot sit inside it. Some men go still in mourning. Henry accelerates. Within weeks the tiltyard is loud again. Quietly loud, if that makes sense to you. sport without pageantry, no gold letters, just the crack of ash and the drum of hooves, morning after morning, a man hammering himself against the only wall that hits back. He hunts until dark. He plays tennis like it owes him money, and in the council chamber he turns, hard toward the oldest medicine kings know, the one his whole boyhood education pointed at like a lance. War, France. It was always going to be France. He has grown up on Agincourt, on the 5th Henry, on the dream every English king inherits with the crown, and now the Pope and his father-in-law of Aragon are assembling a league against the French king, and the young lion wants in, and the old councillors who would rather trade than fight are losing ground month by month to the young men who want glory, and to a rising royal servant, a butcher's son from Ipswich named Thomas Wolsey, who has discovered that the road to power runs through giving the king what the king wants, efficiently, and Wolsey is the most efficient man alive. For the armoury, war is not a rumour, war is a bill of work. Through 1512 the orders change character under your hands. Less tournament finery, more munition harness, plain sound stuff by the hundredweight, bills and bows and the fitting of ships. The king is mad for ships and mad for guns. He will build the navy his daughter's sailors will one day inherit, and twice that year you go down river with Guyot to the yards at Woolwich and Erith, where they're building him monsters, and you stand under the rising oak wall of a warship the way you once stood under the palace, neck bent all the way back, feeling small in the new way, the way of the new century, small next to something men made, and in August the war takes its first bite out of your own story. A sea fight. Off Brest. The English fleet closes with the French, and the Regent, one of the great ships, grapples a French carrack called the Cordelière, and in the middle of the boarding fight the French ship's powder store catches, and both ships burn, locked together, hundreds of men on each, and go down still embraced. And the captain of the Regent, who led the boarding and died in the fire with his men, is Sir Thomas Knivet. Your Knivet, the king's wild friend, the man who laughed and swore and rolled his shoulder after taking your lance's brother on his breastplate, the man who climbed the pillar naked while all Westminster howled 18 months ago in the middle of the best week anyone ever had. The news comes to the yard on a wet evening, and Hal says it out loud, flatly, and everyone looks at the rack where the man's practice harness still hangs. It is in for a strap repair. That is the terrible domestic fact of it. His harness is in your shop waiting for him with a new strap half fitted, and nobody says anything else. And after a while Guyot walks over and takes the harness down, all of it, and carries it into the store himself, alone, 2 trips, and that is the funeral the armoury gives Sir Thomas Knivet. They say the king wept, and then they say the king swore revenge on the whole French fleet, and both are true, and both are him. You are learning to read him now the way you read bells. Grief in, motion out, loss in, war out. Something is being built in that huge chest year by year, out of a dead baby and a drowned friend and a court that never once tells him no, and you cannot see the shape of it yet. Nobody can. It just reads, from the yard as speed. That autumn, on a Sunday, you climb the hill. It is Mag's doing. Sundays after Mass the young household has a few hours of daylight to itself, and there is a hill in the park behind the palace, a steep green shoulder with the old Duke's watchtower on top. Duke Humphrey built it generations back, and the climb up is all wet grass and sheep paths, Mag ahead of you with her skirts kilted up, Peterkin behind complaining in a steady, comfortable drone like a bagpipe. and then the ground levels and the wind hits you and you turn around and there it is. The whole world you live in, laid out like a table set for someone larger. The palace directly below, red and glittering along the waterline, small enough at last to cover with your two hands. The river bending its great silver bend, crowded with sails even on a Sunday. Downstream, the musts at Woolwich, where the king's monsters are growing rib by rib. And upstream, dim in the smoke of its own 1,000 fires, London itself, the bridge a faint stitched line, the tower a pale knuckle, and beyond it, on the clearest day you will ever get, a suggestion, a rumour, that might be Westminster, where they tore the gold off him while you slept on a crate. From up here the palace is quiet as a toy. From up here you cannot hear one lance break, and it comes to you, 16 going on 17, with the wind flattening the grass in long silver strokes, that you've spent nearly 3 years inside the loudest place in England, and this is the first time you have ever seen it. Everything we do is down there, you say. Not well. It is the best you can do at the thought. Mag follows your eyes, and she does what she always does, which is finish your thought better than you started it. And it all looks after itself from here, doesn't it, she says. You'd never guess how many hands it takes. Peterkin, flat on his back in the grass with his eyes shut. You'd never guess how many pies. You stay until the light goes copper, and coming down, half running down the steep grass with the whole valley tilting below and Mag laughing ahead of you, is one of the times you will return to for the rest of your life. One of the smooth stones the mind keeps in its pocket. Remember it now, while it happens. That is a skill too, and it is the one skill this whole story has been trying to teach the boy. The good hour never announces itself. It is only ever visible from the hill of afterward. The next summer, the king goes to war in person, and the armoury goes with him. Not you. You fight your own small war over that, and lose it in one sentence. You're 17 and mine, and France is full of armourers' graves, says Guillot, and takes Hal, who is 20 and journeyman now, and leaves you raging in charge of more than you have ever been in charge of, which you will later understand was the point. The army crosses to Calais 30,000 strong that June of 1513, the greatest English force in a generation, with the king in the middle of it in armour your own hands touched, and Wolsey running the supply of the whole machine like a mill-master. And through the summer the news comes back in packets weeks old. A skirmish where the French cavalry fled so fast the English mockingly called it the Battle of the Spurs. Towns besieged and taken, the king in the trenches in the rain, going his rounds at midnight in armour to hearten the watch, refusing to be kept dry and safe, and being, by every single account, magnificently, infuriatingly happy. And while he's gone, the Scots come over the border at their old ally France's call, and it is not the king who meets them because the king is in France. It is old Surrey and the northern levies, and above them, formerly ruling England as regent, the Queen, Catherine, who takes to the role like her mother's daughter. Her mother, remember, was Isabella of Castile, who ran wars from horseback, and who is riding north with reinforcements when the armies meet at Flodden in September, and Flodden is a catastrophe for Scotland such as few kingdoms ever suffer. The Scottish king himself dead on the field, with the flower of his nobility around him. Catherine sends her husband in France a letter of triumph, and with it a piece of the dead Scottish king's bloodied coat, and suggests, in the way of Isabella's daughter, that she had thought of sending the body itself, but that English hearts would not suffer it. Read that again, whoever you were told Catherine of Aragon was, the sad, stubborn, praying wife of the divorce. In 1513 she is 31, regent of England, and mailing her husband a dead king's coat as a love token. They were for those years a matched pair of lions. That is what makes everything after unbearable. It was not the bad marriage that curdled, it was a great one. The court come home in autumn trailing glory, and Hal comes home with a French knife, a filthy beard, and a silence about certain things that you learn not to press, and the palace roars back to life, and the years. This is how it happens. This is how it always happens. The years begin to move. They move like this. In 1514, the king, not content with buying the best armour in Europe, finally does the thing he threatened. He imports the makers, master craftsmen from Flanders and then permanently from Germany, the Almains, everyone calls them, set up under royal wages at Greenwich itself, a true royal armoury workshop, mill and forge and all, minutes from your own benches, and English armour making changes forever in the space of 2 years. Guyot survives it, because Guyot is Guyot. He makes himself indispensable to the newcomers in small dry ways, lends them his best files and his second best boy. That is you. And the months you spend fetching and translating gestures between a Flemish master and German journeyman teach you more about steel than the 3 years before them. The Greenwich workshops will make harness for kings for 130 years. You were there the week the first German hammer rang, and one May morning in 1515 the whole court climbs your hill, and the king goes to meet Robin Hood. It is a devised thing, of course. Everything at this court is a devised thing, but the shape of it is pure young Henry. On May Day, he and the Queen, and the whole glittering household ride out from Greenwich, up onto the high ground at Shooter's Hill, and there, out of the green wood, come 200 of the King's Own Guard dressed as outlaws in green, with a captain calling himself Robin Hood, who invites the King of England into the greenwood to see how outlaws live. And the king turns to the Queen and asks her, with high ceremony, whether she dares venture among 200 armed outlaws with him. And Catherine, who by now has been performing astonishment for this man for 6 years, and does it better than any player in England, declares that where he goes she is content to go. And in they ride, under arches of green boughs, to a breakfast of venison and wine served in bowers, with singing birds, real ones caged and hidden in the branches to make the wood itself seem to sing. And you know all of this in unusual detail because the armoury dressed 200 stage outlaws' bows and arrows that fortnight, blunted and proved and counted out and counted back, and you personally carried up the hill, at dawn, on your own shoulders, 2 sheaves of arrows and a folding table, sweating like August, so that the greenwood breakfast would seem to have grown there by magic. That is the other thing the boy learns that no chronicle will say plainly. Magic is freight. Every marvel the age produces is carried up a hill on somebody's back before sunrise. The singing wood is a boy with a ladder and 40 bird cages. The gold letters are seamstresses gone half blind by tallow light. The spontaneous outlaw feast is 3 days of lists in Wolsey's clerk's hands. You have stopped resenting this mostly, because there is a secret on the other side of it that the audience never gets. The marvel belongs, in the end, to the people who carried it. The court saw a magic wood for one morning. You can see it still. The bird cages going up into the green. The guard captain practising his outlaw voice behind a cart. The Queen's face, passing close to where you stood with your table, wearing the smallest private smile under the performed astonishment, the smile of a woman thinking correctly that no one in the world was watching her. In 1515 you turn 20 and finish your term, and the indenture your father marked is discharged, and Guyot marks the day by paying you a journeyman's wage from Saturday, and working you exactly as hard from Monday, and by one other thing, he gives you his second best skiving knife, the one your hand has borrowed for 6 years, handle worn to the shape of a grip that turns out, when you close your fingers, to have slowly become your grip. He says nothing when he gives it to you. There was never any danger he would. That same year Mag and you stop pretending the boiling house step is about pies, and the year after, on a Sunday in May with the hawthorn out, you marry her at the friary door, and Peterkin weeps harder than either mother present, and your wedding feast is held in the harness-room yard on trestles, and the kitchen, Mag's kitchen, her whole scalded, freckled, foul-mouthed, open-handed nation sends out food that makes the armoury boys go quiet with respect. You rent 2 rooms in East Greenwich with a window that gets the morning. Her forearms never lose the lace of scald marks. You never once wish they would. And the king's years move too, and now I have to be honest with you about the shape of them, because this is a story about young Henry, and young Henry is running out. In 1516, at last, at Greenwich itself, a child of Catherine's lives, a girl, Mary, they christen her, in the friary church you can see from your window, and the king, disappointed and refusing to be, says the thing everyone repeats, if it is a daughter this time, by God's grace sons will follow. We are both young. It is good line. He is 24. He'll say versions of it for 10 more years, while the christenings and the funerals alternate, and each time the line will be a little harder to say, and the man saying it a little harder. Because here is the ledger nobody at court says aloud, and everybody keeps. Catherine is 6 years older than he is. The stillbirths and the small graves accumulate with a terrible patience, and a king's marriage is never only a marriage, it is the succession, it is the treaty, it is the peace his father bled for, all sleeping in one bed. You watch the whole country exhale in 1509. You can feel it year by year through the 1520s, beginning to hold its breath again. The body changes too, slowly. He is superb well into his 30s, understand, still breaking lances, still exhausting horses and ambassadors, waist to trim 35 in the harness of 1520 when he goes to meet the French king at that impossible golden summit near Calais. 2 courts trying to out-magnificence each other for 3 weeks in a valley of tents, where he wrestles the King of France on impulse and, this is true and he never forgot it, is thrown cleanly in front of everyone by a quick French hip, and this time, older, watched by Europe. He does not laugh and ask to be shown the throw. Note the difference. You noted it from a distance of 2 kingdoms, reading the letter Hal sent from the Calais forges, and you thought of the grass at Greenwich 10 years before, and the boy who came up from a fall wild with delight, and you felt the first cold touch of the arithmetic. The fools stay the same. The man they land on doesn't. The jousting itself turns on him by degrees like a friend growing dangerous. In 1524 you have your own shop by then, in Greenwich town, harness repair and fine leather work. 2 apprentices of your own, but the yard still sends you overflow work and you still know everything an hour after it happens. In 1524 he runs a course against his friend Brandon with his visor open. Forgets it, or trusts it, no one ever settles which. Brandon's lance splinters full on the king's open face, fills his headpiece with wood, and by every law of that yard he should have died the death you spent your whole boyhood fearing. He is bruised and shaken and lucky past all deserving, and being Henry he insists on running 6 more courses that same day to show the world it was nothing. You hear it that evening and you have to go out and stand in the street a while. Your hands, 20 years trained, are perfectly steady. It is the rest of you that shakes, and in January of 1536 at Greenwich, in the tiltyard, your feet no blindfolded, the last fall comes. Armoured, horsed, 44 years old and heavy now, he goes down in the course, and the horse, armoured too, comes down upon him, and he lies unconscious for 2 hours while the court stands around the body of the Tudor dynasty, not knowing if it breathes. He wakes. He's never the same. The leg injured that day, or an old harm reopened by it. The wound never truly closes again for the rest of his life. It becomes the ulcer of the legend, the stinking leg, the pain that has to be lanced and plugged and endured for 11 more years by a man with no talent whatsoever for enduring. He never jousts again. The body that was his kingdom before England was... The body is gone, and what remains is the appetite, the will, the suspicion, and the power, with the joy burned off like the alcohol out of wine, leaving only the vinegar. You know the rest. Everyone knows the rest. The rest is the only part anyone knows. The marriage to Catherine broken on the wheel of the succession, and the Pope defied, and the abbeys pulled down. You stand in the street with Mag and your children and watch them strip the lead from the friary roof where you were married, and that is your family's own small taste of the great overturning. And Anne Boleyn crowned and then killed, 19 days after that last fall in the tiltyard. Mark the dates, 19 days. And Jane and the son at last, and Jane dead of it. And the ministers razed and destroyed, Wolsey the millmaster dying disgraced on the road, Cromwell after him, and the 2 wives after, and the last one who survived him, and the huge ruined body in its machines, and the smell in the corridors, and the terror at the end so total that for a while it is treason merely to speak of the king's death, so that the men around his deathbed can barely bring themselves to tell him he is dying. That is the monster you were promised in the title, and I have not softened him, and I will not. The blood is real, the tyranny is real, but you were not there for that. You were there before. And on the night the news of the old king's death finally comes down the river, January of 1547, and you are past 50, grey, your own knuckles gone knobbed and weatherwise, your eldest boy running the bench. On that night you sit late by your own fire, and Mag comes and sits by you, greyer too, her scalded forearms folded, and neither of you speaks for a long time, and what is in your mind is not the tyrant. What is in your mind is a cracked lance, and a hand closing around a waxed grip, a gold half-angel spinning in forge light, a big laughing man leaning over Guyot's bench on his forearm saying, "You have the right of it, master, and I was wrong." Torn shirt sleeves in a howling hall, and Nevet on his pillar. A voice above vials on Candlemas Eve through falling snow singing that he loved and would until he died. "He did, you know," you say to Mag, out of an hour of silence, and she does not ask who or what, because she was standing in that snow too. "They all got let out of a small room," she says. "Him as well for a while. That was the trouble, maybe. He never could bear the room again after." You bank the fire. Somewhere across the dark water at Westminster, they are embalming the largest king England ever had, and the bells are going, slow and single, one stroke rolling all the way to silence before the next, and you can still read them after 40 years. You will always be able to read them, but I have run ahead of the boy, and there are debts in the middle years this story still has to pay, because a life is not a chronicle, and the things that mark you are rarely the things that mark the age. So step back with me one more time into the thick of it. to 1517, when you are 22, newly married, and the invisible thing comes to Greenwich. They call it the sweating sickness, the sweat, the English sweat, because it belongs to England the way fog does, and no physician alive understands one true thing about it. It is not the plague. The plague you know. The plague has rules, buboes and bad summers and a week to fight in. The sweat has no rules. It comes out of a clear sky in any season, and it kills in hours, merry at dinner and dead by supper. That is not a proverb. That is a clinical description. That is what it actually does. A man feels a sudden cold dread. They all describe it the same way, a fear that arrives before the fever, as if the body knows first. Then the shaking, then the heat, then the pouring sweat that gives it the name, then a crushing need to sleep, and the ones who are let sleep mostly do not wake. It kills the strong preferentially, or seems to. It kills the young. It has killed, in earlier visitations, Lord Mayors of London back to back, and it likes the court. It climbs toward rich men's houses as if it can smell the linen. It reaches Greenwich in high summer, and the great machine of the palace does the only thing it knows how to do, which is scatter. The court thins overnight. The king, and here is a thing about Henry that the legend gets exactly backward. The king, so careless of lances and open visors and half-ton horses, is terrified of sickness, genuinely deeply all his life. He cannot fight it, you see. That is the whole of it. There is no course to run against it, no throw to be shown slower. He removes with a handful of attendants and moves, and keeps moving, house to house ahead of the reports like a man keeping up wind of smoke, and the physicians approve, because distance is the only medicine anyone owns. The household that cannot scatter stays. You stay. The armoury stays. The kitchens stay at half strength. The laundry stays, because palaces do not stop existing when kings leave them. They just go quiet and keep breathing. And the sweat walks through the ones who stay. It takes a groom you know by his whistle before you ever learned his name. It takes one of the German journeymen, a big slab-handed man who taught you fluting, well at his hammer in the morning and raving wet through his shirt by mid-afternoon, and the other Almains sit up with him in shifts, and he is gone before the second shift. And on the fourth day it comes to the boiling house, not Mag. I will tell you that now, quickly, because you have been holding your breath, and there is no craft in cruelty. Not Mag. It is Peterkin. Peterkin, who crowed on the woodpile the day the prince was born, who did knivet on the pillar with the tent pole until the whole shed howled, who said someone's being murdered at the fox's scream every single black morning for 9 years because it made the fear small. He's 26, strong as a dray, married 2 years to a laundress named Alice with one baby and another coming, and he complains at midday of a headache and a strange dread. He laughs at even while he names it, and by 2 he is shaking, and by 4 you are one of the men carrying him to his lodging on a hurdle, and his back through his soaked shirt is hot in a way that your hands, which know forge heat, which know exactly how hot things are, refuse to believe skin can be. You do what the physicians say, which is nothing dressed in Latin. Keep him warm, not hot. Do not let him sleep before the crisis passes. That is the great commandment, the only lever anyone believes in. Keep them awake through the hours of the pull. And so you and Hal and Alice sit that whole endless evening in a room that smells of tallow and vinegar and fear sweat, and you keep him awake. You talk to him. You make him answer. You slap his cheeks with a wet cloth when the eyes roll, and Hal props him and walks him 3 steps and back, 3 steps and back, and you go through every story the shed owns, the pie economy, the frozen breastplate, the fox, the gold letters, and Peterkin drifts and rallies and drifts, and once, deep in the middle of it, he surfaces all the way, clear-eyed, and looks at you with water running off his chin like a man leaning out of a river, and says perfectly reasonably, "Will, if I sleep now, I won't mind it. I'm that tired." "You'll mind it," you say. "Alice will mind it. Walk." And he walks. 3 steps and back, 3 steps and back. All night the 3 of you haul on him like men on a capsized boat, and somewhere in the smallest hours the fever breaks. You feel it break under your hand, the skin going from furnace to merely burning to damp to unbelievably cool. And he sleeps then, the allowed sleep, the safe sleep, and wakes at noon, weak as string and hungry as a wolf, and lives. He lives. One in the room next door did not, and the German did not, and the groom did not, and there is no reason in it anywhere, no lesson, nothing you did that their people did not do. The sweat takes and leaves like a tide taking one boat off a beach and stranding the next. You walk home to Mag in the grey of that morning through a palace precinct gone silent as Sunday, past doors with rosemary nailed to them, so tired the world has soft edges, and she meets you in the doorway and reads your face. Lives. Her face asks, lives. Your face answers. And she puts her forehead against your collarbone and stands there a long time, and neither of you says one word, because there are hours the language was not built for, and you have just spent one. The court drifts back in the autumn when the sickness burns out, the way it always burns out, as causelessly as it came. The king returns loud and golden and untouched, and the machine spins back up, and within a month the tiltyard is cracking and booming again as if the summer had not happened. But it happened. You count differently afterward. There is before the sweat and after the sweat in your private calendar for the rest of your life. And Peterkin never again says someone's being murdered at the Fox. He says, "There's our fox," gently, like greeting a neighbour. Small change. You notice it every time. Some fears cannot be made small any more once you have carried a friend on a hurdle. They can only be made familiar. And one more debt, from the year after, because this story has been all steel and kings and dying, and your life was mostly none of those things, and I will not let the record lie by omission. The middle of a life is made of middles, so take one ordinary day from 1518, chosen almost at random, and keep it, because this is what the years were actually made of, 9 days in 10. You wake in the 2 rooms in East Greenwich before light to the world's oldest alarm, which is a wife's cold feet, and you are first up and rake the fire and set the pot, because that was settled between you and the first month and never renegotiated. Bread, cheese, small beer, standing up. The walk to the yard in the river dark, past the net menders' sheds where lanterns are already burning, exchanging the grunt and nod that passes for eloquence among working men before sunrise. The shop cold as a well, until the forge next door warms the party wall, which it does by mid-morning, so that all winter every man's bench migrates a few inches wall-ward by noon, and back by evening, a slow tide of stools nobody ever mentions. The work that day is nothing, glorious nothing. A hunting saddle in for restuffing, sweat-rotted wool to be picked out, a smell like wet dog and old cheese that lives in your nose till dinner, and new wool teased and packed, and the seat sewn taut with a curved needle and waxed thread, 200 stitches, each one set with an awl, pull, lock, pull, until your right palm carries the thread's hot line across it like a brand. A gauntlet lame that wants a rivet, a gentleman's stirrups to be re-leathered, and the gentleman's groom stays to gossip, and from him you learn what the court is singing, what the king said to the French ambassador, which two lords' servants brawled at the water-gate, and over what? The palace's whole vast weather system, arriving at your bench the way weather should, as talk over work. Dinner at midday is the day's hinge, a cook-shop pie eaten on the river stairs with Hal, watching the barges, arguing about nothing with the deep contentment of men who have argued about nothing together for a decade. The afternoon is the saddle again, and the light moving across the bench, and the particular trance of handwork done well within your powers. The mind half on the stitches and half loose, wandering, planning a cradle, because there is going to need to be a cradle by Martimas, which is its own story humming under the whole day like a held note, and the walk home at dusk, and Mag at the fire, shaping the news of her day, which is better told than yours because she is better at telling, and the stropping of the knife 12 strokes aside, and bed, and the river through the shutter, and sleep with nothing wrong in it. That is the day. Multiply it by some thousands. That is what a life is, and what a kingdom is, under the chronicles. An uncountable tonnage of ordinary days, borne on ordinary backs, stitch by stitch by stitch. The kings get the pages, the days get the world. There is one more scene the story owes you, and it happens years before that fire, so let me walk you back a little way, because endings are not where the meaning lives. The meaning lives in the handing on. Master Guyot dies in the winter of 1531 at his bench, which is the only place he ever agreed to be, an old walnut of a man outlasted by his own forearms. He has said perhaps 4 affectionate sentences to you in 22 years, and left you in his will. A will from Guyot is itself astonishing, a lifetime of silence suddenly notarized. His tools, his Flemish psalter that neither of you could read, and one line dictated to the friary clerk that the clerk swears he took down word for word to Will Dunmore who brought the lance. You stand in the cold church holding that line, and you're 15 again, in the shed at the end of the tiltyard, with a hairline crack under your thumbnail and 2 futures in your hands, and you understand at last that he remembered that morning, all his life exactly as you have, as the morning that decided what kind of man you were going to be, decided it before you knew a decision was happening. Boys who hide cracks kill kings. Boys who find them keep their teeth. He built you out of 1 sentence and 20 years of watching. That is what masters are. You did not understand him at all, and then, in the end, entirely. And so, in the years after, when your own first apprentice comes to you, a Deptford waterman's son named Collet, 13, all wrists and terror, hands soft as bread. You know your work is not really the leather. Your work is the sentence. You wait for the morning it can be planted. It comes the way it always comes, in the shape of a mistake. Colette, rushing, fits a repaired stirrup leather without proving the stitching under load, and hangs the finished saddle and says nothing, and it is only luck that your eye snags on 1 proud stitch as you pass, 1 stitch sitting a hair high, and you take the leather down and it parts in your 2 hands like wet paper at the 4th pull. A stirrup leather that parts at the gallop breaks a man's skull. You stand there holding the 2 pieces, and the boy has gone the colour of tallow waiting for the strap, because everyone has told him about masters and straps. You put the pieces on the bench in front of him instead. You take his hand, soft, shaking, 13, and you press his thumbnail along the failed stitching. Once, twice, until you feel him feel it. You found it, you say, which is a lie, and the right lie, and you say the rest of it the way it was said to you, one word to a nail. Boys who hide flaws kill men. Boys who find them keep their teeth. Now do it properly. And Collet, he looks up, tallow-coloured, drowning. Every man in this trade has a leather like this behind him. Mine was a lance. Ask me about it some day when we're both older, and I'll tell you whose. You watch the question light up behind his eyes, and choose wisely to wait years to ask it. Good boy, he will do. That evening you walk home the long way, along the river, past the palace wall, and you stop where you always stop, at the Watergate stairs, where a man can stand and see the whole red length of Placentia with the tide sliding by, and you let yourself do the thing you ration carefully, which is remember on purpose. The palace is quieter these years. The king, heavy now, keeps more to Whitehall and Hampton Court, palaces taken from a fallen minister, and Greenwich, the birth house, the pleasant place, has the particular stillness of a room someone loved and left. But the armoury mills still thump behind the wall. You can feel them through your boot soles faintly, the German hammers still keeping the time they've kept since 1515, and boys still carry charcoal across the lower court with their whole spines complaining, and somewhere in there is a 15-year-old lying awake in a loft tonight with his face to the wall, learning what Hal taught you. Everyone does. Don't do it during the day. The evenings belong to Mag and the children and the fire, and to a ritual you've never told anyone the inside of. Most nights, last thing, you take out the skiving knife and strop it, whether it needs it or not. 12 strokes aside on the old leather, the sound like slow breathing, and while your hands do it, your mind walks the checks. The day's work, seam by seam, buckle by buckle, the way Guillaume's thumbnail used to walk the harness in the candlelit dark. It is not worry. It stopped being worry years ago. It is more like prayer, if prayer were made of leather and edges. The day held up to the light turns slowly, proven. Then the knife goes in its cloth, and the fire is banked, and the last thing before sleep is the river sound through the shutter. The same sound in East Greenwich that it was above the harness room, the same sound it was in Kent, the oldest sound you own. And some of those nights, on the edge of sleep, the arithmetic of your life lays itself out plain, and it is a strange sum and you've stopped arguing with it. You serve the most infamous king in your country's history and came away loving something in him that history has no further use for. You watch the best decade of a man's life from the distance of a lace length, and then watch 30 years of its long ruin from the distance of a town, and you cannot make the two men into one man, and you have stopped trying, because the failure to make them one man is the truth. People are not one man, not even kings, especially not kings. What you know that the chronicles will smooth away is small and certain and fits in a hand, that his laugh came before his rank got to the door, that he asked real questions and heard real answers once, that he held his wife up in the worst hour of her young life, once, before he became her worst hour. That when his own people stripped the gold off his back, there was a heartbeat where it could have gone to blood, and it went to laughter, because at 20, laughter was still the nearest thing to his hand, and that a boy with cracked knuckles once stood in a cold shed holding a flawed lance and the whole weight of a dynasty, and chose the walk to the master's bench, and that the king never knew. That is the last thing, the thing under all of it. How much of every kingdom is carried, every single day, by people the king never knows, the stitchers and the scourers and the boiling house girls, the guillots, the mags, the hands. You were the hands. It was enough. It was in the end. You test the word the way you'd test a strap and it holds. It was a good life. So come back down now, gently, to where we can end. An old man's bedtime in a small stone-floored house in East Greenwich in the reign of the boy King Edward, who is the son the whole story was always about, the son that cost so much. The fire is banked. The knife is stropped and wrapped. Mag's breathing has already found its slow night rhythm beside you, the rhythm you could pick out of 100 sleepers, and through the shutter comes the river, patient as ever, carrying its tide up past the palace and its tide back down, twice a day, every day, since before there were kings to name the palaces after. Your shoulders ache. They have ached for 40 years, and they will ache tomorrow, the old honest ache of charcoal sacks and lance racks, and you have made your peace with it the way you make peace with weather, and tonight, like most nights, the ache is almost company. Your hands lie open on the blanket. They have done everything now that they are ever going to do. They have scoured mail and closed rivets and waxed grips and cut gold letters off purple velvet while the slow bell struck. They have caught a spinning coin against a boy's chest. They have held a cracked lance and a knife handed over in silence, and a scalded forearm on a hawthorn Sunday, and the shoulders of children, and the two halves of a failed stirrup leather in front of a tallow-faced apprentice. Hands remember everything. That is their mercy. Long after the mind has surrendered the dates, the hands keep the weight of things, and the weight is the truth of them. You are tired enough, warm enough, safe enough. You have a roof your own work paid for, and a wife breathing beside you, and a son at the bench, and an apprentice who found the floor today, or was allowed to believe he did, which comes to the same thing in the end. That is more than the boy on the winter wagon dared hope for. That is more than most of the 500,000 souls in the great city upriver will ever hold at once. That is enough. Let the day be proven and put away now, seam by seam. Let the fire settle in the grate with its small ticking speech. Let the river carry the last barges down on the ebb, lanterns swinging, watermen calling low across the water and falling quiet. Somewhere upstream, the palaces stand in the dark with their 1,000 windows black, and the night porters walk their rounds with horn lanterns, and in the lofts above the harness rooms the apprentices lie 3 to a mattress, and the youngest is homesick and hiding it, and the oldest is pretending to sleep so the youngest can cry unheard, because that kindness too is handed down, master to boy, older than any dynasty. Tomorrow there will be leather to cut and edges to prove, and a boy to teach. Tomorrow the mills will thump behind the palace wall, and the tide will turn twice, and the bells will say what bells say. But that's tomorrow. Right now there is only this, the dark and the river, and the breathing beside you, and the long, slow loosening of a body that has worked hard and is done for the day. Centuries will pass. The pleasant place by the water will crumble and be pulled down, and other buildings will rise where the tiltyard was, white stone where the red brick stood, and the hill you climbed with Mag will still be there, and people will still climb it, and still turn around at the top into the wind, and still go quiet at what they see. The river will be bridged and tunnelled and tamed. The armour your hands touched will lie in glass cases in quiet halls, and strangers will file past it and stop, almost all of them, at the same 2 harnesses, the slim one and the vast one, and read the little card, and look from one to the other, and feel exactly what you felt, without knowing they are feeling it in your place. And the king you served will become a story, and the story will keep only the monster, because monsters are easier to carry than men. But now and then someone will find the other pieces, a song about good company, a herald's tally of broken lances, a night when a crowd tore the gold off a laughing boy, and hold them up to the light, and turn them slowly, the way a master proves a strap, and feel the old strange sum refuse once again to come out even. Some things don't change, hands don't change, the work of hands doesn't change, the finding of the flaw, the telling of the truth about it, the doing of it properly, the need, at the end of a long day, to lay the tools down and let the dark hold you up for a while. That doesn't change either. It is the same need in the loft and in the palace, the same in the boy and in the king, the same in you tonight. Wherever you are lying, listening to this old story go quiet. So let it go quiet. Let the lances stand in their racks. Let the forge cool, tick by tick, under its grey coat of ash. Let the gold letters lie in their leather bag, and the coin in its seam, and the knife in its cloth. Let the river run. You've earned this rest, all the hands have. Take it, and dream, if you dream at all, of a green morning long ago, and snow falling into torchlight, and a big young voice above vials singing that he loved and would until he died. Good night.